So I'm Lok, I'm based in Perth, and my medium is mixed medium, essentially. I first got into art in primary school. I remember doing my first portrait in like year 5, where we had to draw the person sitting next to us. And I remember school contacting my parents and saying, oh, did you know your son can draw? And they were like, no. They were like, yeah, send him to an art school. And then that's sort of where it all started and began. First influences on my work would be essentially trying to capture stories. I've always been drawn to stories of some shape or form, and specifically to do with people. And in terms of their background and where they're from and what they had to say based on their experiences or what they liked or not liked. So it's definitely, that is probably my main influence. I'd describe my style as, I guess, a process of layering, essentially. It's just a layered style, if I could term it that way. So I think it's essentially progressed over the years in exploring the process of applying layers to the art. So whether it's, the initial phase of drawing someone, and then how can you then reimagine that drawing on a piece of paper? Is it something that's then printed, or is it just physically applied to the medium itself? And then each layer after that is using something different, and it's not really thinking about what I'm using, but trying to put myself in the story of the person I'm trying to draw. And that's how the process has evolved a little bit. Yeah, definitely. I feel like the biggest aha moment was like, just trust yourself essentially, and lean into those urges to do something, even though it might not necessarily, eventuate to something you like, but it's just, I guess, a reflection of where you are as an artist in that specific moment in time. And in that way, you'll always progress, and I feel like you'll never look back and say, this thing is sort of not exactly what I envisioned, but it essentially just keeps evolving that way if you're willing to lean into those changes. Yeah, I grew up in South Africa, moved to Perth in 2020 before COVID. And I guess the whole big move plays a big part of my style as well, which is, I guess, relates back to your previous question. But for me to force myself to be in a foreign place was, I think, an element that essentially accelerated the way in which I perceive my art and perceive the things around me as well. Uh, 100%. So in South Africa, it can be very racial. Pretty much all the time. There's an element of race that's pretty much embedded within everything. And I guess to do with my own heritage, a lot of the times we're sort of put into this class where you're neither white or black, so you're kind of definitely in the middle. And I guess growing up in South Africa, that's helped me a lot, because I've never really latched onto anything specific in terms of my creative outlet. I've allowed myself to always be in this middle ground that, I can explore something, come back to it, do something else, come back to it, and never be distinguishable, if that makes sense. So you're never sort of forced into a bracket, and it feels very, I guess, liberating in the sense that you can just be whatever and not necessarily feel like you're putting yourself in a box. Yeah, that's like the fact that you mentioned the text and the images. It's very important to me because, my whole creative outlet is every story begins with a line, and there's a relationship between what people say and what we put on paper. And most of the time you find that, most art is up for interpretation. And I sort of thought, let's put something on the paper that's literally directly related to someone, and therefore I guess the takeaway from that is that people can directly associate or perceive and create whatever assumptions they want to based on fact. And I feel like it becomes a lot more personal and a lot more relatable, because there's certain elements within certain stories that become quite personal to yourself as the viewer, or other people who view the art and the story themselves. So I think just having that relationship between the text and the art, it just allows people to actually listen and not just look and consume. Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question, because I think for me, in terms of, I guess, the future of Every Story Begins with a Line, is just I'll continue with that, because in a way, the whole journey of this lifelong project is that I'm meeting all these new people all the time, and I'm always experiencing different stories and listening to different stories, and whether it's past wisdom that's been passed down from someone's dad or their grandfather or grandmother or whatever, but it's almost as if the stories are evolving themselves because of the fact that there's so many different people that I draw and share their stories, and it's almost like that in itself is enough progress and progression for me, because it challenges the way I visually interpret that as well. So it's always a challenge. Every single story is different, which I feel is exciting. And it doesn't necessarily mean I need to change the style on purpose, but I feel like I actually don't know where it's going to end up. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know every single story is going to influence me in a different way, and I feel like that's exciting enough, is not knowing what that will be until it happens. So at the moment it's just, an is what it is kind of thing, based on the information I receive and listen to and look at and people that I meet. So yeah. Yeah, I mean, so I've done a recent event with an African restaurant called Follicle, and the 5 people that we chose to draw and share their stories, those were very interesting, because it was essentially based on hair and I guess all the diasporas associated to Black African hair. And for me it was very interesting and compelling that even though sometimes you might feel alone in your experience based on, certain physical attributes to yourself that's associated to a race or a heritage that you may have, is that everyone has this common sort of experience that they've all gone through, which for me was compelling enough, because it makes you realize that no one is alone. And that for me was the most compelling sort of set of stories that we've ever shared. So sometimes it depends. So really it all starts with a conversation, is what I always tell everyone, is the artwork starts with a conversation. It's not even before I put anything on paper. It's actually the verbal and physical interaction I have with someone. And sometimes some stories have been just people I've met randomly. It's not even people I know. And sometimes it's a little bit more planned, but essentially the way I go about it is, for example, if I were to draw you, I'd say, look, are you interested? Can we catch up? And it might just be a walk around the area and we just talk shit for like, an hour. But it's never curated, so people always feel like I need to give them a set of questions for them to answer in our interactions. And sometimes, and what I've learned is that we all need to start listening more, because people will say something but not necessarily tell you what they want to say directly. There's always an indirect way of going about something, and I've learned to pick up these nuances with people where, okay, why'd you say that? And then that might open up a different conversation, and that's where it starts. It's literally just a conversation, and then it evolves to writing down that experience with that person in attempts to sort of share that story, and then the actual visualization of that happens after the fact. Group shows are very, very important, because what I find is, there's a whole different set of layers of complexity to exhibitions, but solo exhibitions, there's a lot of pressure on solo exhibitions. So I feel like artists are put under pressure to put out a body of work. It depends on the artist, but some artists might use old works. But if you're under pressure to always create, that's where you sort of, I guess, misalign to your own creative ethos sometimes. And with group exhibitions, it takes that pressure off. But you also learn a lot from other artists. So I think it's a good way for artists to meet other artists and get to know about other creatives in a city or a place. Because at the end of the day, like, there shouldn't be a layer of competition, I feel, in terms of any creative industry, even though I understand sometimes business is business, but I think it's a good way for people to actually meet other creatives and, yeah, I guess just acknowledge the fact that there are other forms of art, and those other forms of art can actually, influence you positively as well and add to your own creative process and thinking. Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I do have another job, which I think helps. So there isn't really a financial pressure for me to sort of push things to get sold. When things are sold, there's definitely a feeling that you want to sort of latch onto in terms of validation that you're sort of engaging a crowd or your people. But I think we also need to remember that sometimes the value in art is actually people taking the time to come and view and engage with it as well. I feel like it's not all just about doing something and then going, oh, okay, it's been sold for, $10,000, and then all you're doing is repeating the same process. And it becomes a trend, I feel, then. And it doesn't necessarily become valuable from a social perspective, I feel. So I think it just depends on where your value lies, and I think my value lies more with the social interaction rather than the monetary value to the art. Because you can't really put value on someone's story, I feel. Yeah, I think my message to people would be, it's okay to feel comfortable to share your story with people. I understand it's a lot more complicated. And it's not as easy as just, you don't want to be someone who just yells out to the world that, my name's whatever. But sometimes I feel like we live in a world where it would be better if we all made people feel comfortable enough to even say, hi, my name is, whoever, Nick or Nelson, or, that's who I am. And then that opens a conversation for a lot of other things. I feel we should definitely listen more. That's another thing as well. And I think for the show, I'm excited to listen to the other people who are involved in the show as well, the other artists, the people who are putting it together. So yeah, I'm excited for another learning experience with more creative people, which is definitely all good. Nothing bad to say about the show at all.
Hey, Chino life. Hey. Chino life, me all hack, been no taps and we go live. Ego no, me no like,